First of all, I'd like to apologize to my class. They've probably heard all of this before. But at the same time, it's so good. So the challenge with telling a Bible story is it's hard to make it more special than it is or bring something out about it because everybody's heard and thought about it before. But at the same time, the beauty of the Bible stories is they're so simple, but they always have more depth to them. So hopefully you'll enjoy it as we go over one of our most beloved favorite Bible stories. Although my wife did correct me, she said that it is not our most beloved and most favorite because, of course, that would be Joseph. And she's actually shocked I'm not talking about Joseph today. So you can turn with me and you can follow along. This is Daniel chapter 3, of course. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits, and he set it up in the Plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather the satraps and administrators and governors and counselors and treasurers, judges, magistrates, and the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image of the king, which Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So I find it interesting that it happened to be an image. And it's all gold. Why that is important is if you remember the story of Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he had a dream of an image whose head was gold. And Daniel told him, the head of the image is you. And he talked about the beauty and glory of Babylon. And then the next kingdom that came was inferior in nature and metal to his kingdom, but it was the next kingdom, and it happened to be silver, and the next kingdom bronze, and the next kingdom ended up being iron, and then the feet of iron and clay, and finally this was destroyed, and the kingdom of heaven came, and the Lord ruled among men. It was meant to teach Nebuchadnezzar a lesson and teach him about the plans God had for us. And also, it opens a window into prophecy. This is the very first of the prophetic studies that go through Daniel and Revelation, and they all build on each other. Very, very important. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't like this. He felt like he wanted to be the whole image. And in fact, he made a challenge, and I think it was a challenge to God, saying, I am that whole image. Now, it wasn't just that precipitated this. If you study ancient history, Nebuchadnezzar was having some significant challenges to his rule about this time. And he had put down several rebellions and several revolts throughout his kingdoms. And with this, he wanted to have everyone pledge allegiance. And what better to do than he builds this image and have everyone pledge allegiance to him through the image. So there was a lot of pressure, all the governors, regents, everybody, except for one person was missing. Who was that person? Daniel. For some reason, Nebuchadnezzar knew Daniel so well, and he did not want to lose Daniel. So somehow Daniel got sent off on some errand, but there were some people that were there. They were Daniel's 3 friends. And everybody had to come, so they did. And imagine the pressure where you want to show your loyalty. Nebuchadnezzar is asking for everyone to pledge their loyalty to him. But the only way to do that is to worship this image. If you didn't worship the image, you were professing your disloyalty to the king. It wasn't as simple of whether you're just worshiping. It was the most disrespectful thing they could do to their benefactor, who they had served faithfully. And they wanted to show their faithfulness. But he told everyone, he says, when you hear the sound of the instruments, it's time to fall down and worship. So they did. They played all these instruments for worship music. I find it interesting that even now, one of the most important parts of our worship services is music. But in this case, Nebuchadnezzar had them play all these instruments. It was probably beautiful music set to inspire. Everyone fell down to worship. But it's funny because it says certain of the Chaldeans came to him and informed him that there were these guys over there that weren't worshiping. So it's funny. They said, "O king, live forever." And this is verse 9. "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone hears the music and the horn and the flute and the lyre and the psaltery and the symphony of all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of this burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of Babylon, of the province of Babylon." So Nebuchadnezzar didn't send them off. He actually had them as rulers in Babylon. And I find it interesting that the Chaldeans, which is another way of saying Babylonians, were the ones complaining and telling him about them. Do you think they had ulterior motives? But they had to tattle on them. Obviously, you'd think that over a whole plain of people bending down and worshiping, Nebuchadnezzar might have noticed. But they told him anyway. And he became enraged and furious. And he called them to be brought to him, and they came. The funny thing is, Nebuchadnezzar, I would suspect that Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't have given a second chance to anyone else. But he offered them a second chance, and he said, you guys were involved with my dream. You'd think that he would have taken a clue there. And he said, you guys were involved with my dream. You have been faithful. You were so much smarter than anyone else that I trained. I hate to lose you. Let's give you another chance. And did they take the chance? No. In fact, they said, we're not careful to answer you. I like the old King James Version. The New King James wasn't as clear to me. But them, they say, we're not careful to answer you. That means we don't have to think about this very long. It's just, save your time, King. We appreciate the chance, but we want to make it clear who we are and what we're going to do. And they say that, and they say, "O King, live forever." So they want to be as faithful and true, respectful of him as possible. But they say, we will not worship your image, which you have erected. They said, our God is able to deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we will not worship or serve your image. And I think that's very interesting. They made a point that they didn't require God to do something. They didn't expect necessarily him to do something, but they knew he could. And they wanted to make that point. And a lot of times in our lives, when we have bad things facing us or happening, how many times do we go to God and say, God, this is where the rubber meets the road. If you don't do this, I might not be able to believe in you. Or I can't believe you've done this to me, God. As opposed to looking at it like these young men did and say, hey, I know that you can take me out of this. I know you can handle this. But no matter what, I'm going to serve you. I'm going to praise you through it. How many of us would have that kind of steadfastness? And it's a challenge for us. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar became very angry, and he said, heat the furnace 7 times hotter. Now, I'm guessing that this furnace was made for melting gold to use on the image. The melting point of gold is one of the highest melting points. So if you're making a furnace 7 times hotter, we're talking 7,000, 8,000 degrees, if that's possible. It's incredibly hot. Now we realize, and it might have been more of an exaggeration, but we realize that this is very, very hot. Hotter than they've ever had these furnaces before. And what are we going to do with this? We just want to make it sure where no one's going to walk out of here alive. And that was his point. But I do think the numbers here are very interesting because 7 is a number of completion. It's God's number. It's a holy number. And if I remember, Daniel and his friends, how much smarter were they than everyone else? 10 times smarter. But there are some other things, and we'll, I think, get into it in a bit, where 7 becomes a very important number in God's Word. The fiery furnace is heated 7 times hotter, and so much so that the men who bound them and threw them in. And it says he was in such a hurry that they were killed. So normally, I guess they would have enough common sense where they would have used an apparatus or something, just like they did with the gold, to sort of place them in the fire. But in this case, they were in such a hurry, he says, don't mess with all of that, just throw them in. And the soldiers that threw them in were killed by the heat of the flames. And they were thrown in with all their clothes, everything else just wrapped in rope. And the rope was gone. Nebuchadnezzar is looking with pride at this and suddenly realizes that there's not just 3 people in the fire, and they're standing there walking around with their ropes burned off, talking, and the one looks like the Son of God. And he actually says it outright. He said, didn't we throw 3 men in the fire? And there's 4, and one looks like the Son of God. Of course, I tried to read Ellen White about this story, and I love what she has to say, because she says, how in the world would Nebuchadnezzar know what the Son of God looked like? How would he know what to expect there, or any descriptions or anything else? And she says that the reason why Nebuchadnezzar knew and recognized the Lord is because of his association with Daniel and his friends. And Nebuchadnezzar, this heathen king, because of the witness of Daniel and his friends, was able to recognize Jesus in the fire with them. I'd like to bring out, though, that Jesus didn't save them from the fire. He saved them in the fire. And he was there with them through the fire. And they came out of the other side not burned, and their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. And I remember, I don't know if you had Uncle Arthur's bedtime stories, but I love the illustrations. But in one of the illustrations, you can see this black smoke billowing out of this furnace. So you think about it, there must have been a lot of smoke. It was white hot. I'm trying to imagine how Nebuchadnezzar could even see through the opening that they had thrown them through, where he could see them walking around inside because of the tremendous heat. I'm sure he was sort of shielding himself looking. But interestingly enough, after they came out, Nebuchadnezzar had them brought out, and he said, come out. So they came out, and Nebuchadnezzar had completely forgotten about why they were there. Which I have to say, Nebuchadnezzar is one of my more favorite characters in the Bible. And one of the reasons is this, because when he saw something that would work, he did it. I think that's why he was such a successful king. And when he saw that he was wrong, he was a very prideful guy. But when he finally realized something, he went all in. he and Peter are going to have a lot in common in heaven. But he went all in, and suddenly he wasn't worried about the image. He wasn't worried about that, and then he makes this proclamation. And he says, if anyone says anything about the God of these three men, he will be cut into pieces. So he still had something to learn, because he was starting to try to tell people what they should do when it comes to God and religion. But he was trying. Now, when I read this story, it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story of faith for us. But there are too many things that overlap with Revelation, and I like to bring that out. So in Revelation chapter 17, the angel goes to John and he says, "Let me show you the great harlot that rules over the world." And he takes John in the spirit to see this amazing sight of this scarlet woman and this beast. And the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns and rules over the kings of the earth. And its name is Babylon. Her name is Babylon, and she drinks from the blood of the martyrs. So there's this city that's ruling the world at the end of time. And Gabriel goes as far as to say, let me explain what this symbolism is. And Gabriel says that this harlot that's on this beast is the great city that rules the world, and it's built on 7 hills. It's only one famous city that is a ruling power in the world that was built on 7 hills. And it literally was built on 7 hills. They're not symbolic. And it has also, he says, there are the 7 heads. And they say there are 5 that have come, 1 that is, or 1 that received a deadly wound, and 1 that is yet to come. So it gives us a little bit of timing of when John is seeing this in Earth's history. Because John isn't seeing this in Earth's history back when John was living. John is seeing this in Earth's history at a very special time. And if we look at the timing, we can say that there are 4 main kingdoms that have ruled. And then John was sort of in between 2 kingdoms. The 2 kingdoms he was between was the transition of the Roman Empire, which was the 4th kingdom, to the 5th kingdom, or the 5th major world power that ruled during the Dark Ages, which was the papacy. And now the papacy receives a deadly wound, which Berthier, general of Napoleon, they had a falling out. Interestingly enough, a year before, Napoleon had made a deal with the Pope. It looked like everything was going to be fine and the Pope was going to be supported by Napoleon, but somehow someone conspired, and Napoleon's brother-in-law was actually killed through agencies of the papacy, and Napoleon found out about it, and he was enraged. And he had his General Berthier take the Pope captive, and the Pope died in exile. Interestingly enough, since then, the papacy's power has waned. Mussolini made a deal with the papacy where the papacy was given back their identity and their power as a state power back at the time of World War II. Since then, there was a trial by President Truman to meet with the Pope, and there was such an uproar that he almost lost his bid for the presidency following that. Recently, though, we've had the Pope address Congress. We've had the Pope come before the world leaders, and they've even had a conference out at Rome with the leaders of the European Union, which re-signed their pact of the European Union under the auspices of the Pope. Is the deadly wound being healed? That's what John is seen as happening in Revelation chapter 17, where this beast has one more head, one more ruling yet to come. So John is standing there at our time watching this beast of Babylon. It's called Babylon for a reason, because if we go over to Revelation chapter 13, we see a similar beast, which is very identical in the first part of Revelation chapter 13. But then we see the second beast of chapter 13, which is the beast from the earth. And this beast from the earth is able to call fire down from heaven for anyone who refuses to worship the image of the beast. This image that it sets up to the beast that came before it. It's interesting that he's able to call fire down from heaven because of a lack of worship to this image that it set up. Now, is there starting to be a correlation that we see three faithful followers of God refusing to worship an image that is set up that has to do with worship? And the whole world is wandering after this beast. Very interesting that the two beasts are working in tandem. And the one has a deadly wound that was healed. And we have this beast from the earth, not the beast from the sea, but this beast from the earth that is setting up this powerful image that is threatening death with fire from heaven if you don't worship it. And is seeking to control consciences, very much like Nebuchadnezzar did, where he made these mandates, these grand mandates, over who and how you should worship. It took Nebuchadnezzar to the end of his life before he made a mandate that didn't command people's consciences on how to worship. Up until then, he was commanding people on what to believe and how to do. I find it interesting that it happens to be three faithful followers of God. There is something to do with that number, because there are special times where God's people come in that perfect number of following the Godhead. So we have them standing in the Plain of Dura with the command to worship, and they're thrown into the fiery furnace. This is one of the arguments for our friends who believe in a rapture, because they didn't get saved from the fiery furnace. They went through the fiery trials, and Jesus was with them. A lot of times when we're going through these times, it's going to be a big temptation, even now, on whether you feel like the Lord is with you in your trials. But Jesus will be with us. We can hold that promise because he was with them in the fiery furnace. And again, these three people are a type of God's latter-day church now. Ellen White says so when she reviews this. So we can hold on to those things as we deal with the Babylon and the Nebuchadnezzar of old and the Babylon and the modern Nebuchadnezzars as they try to command worship. Another thing that's interesting about this is the command of the worship and the mark of the beast. A lot of people start saying, oh, this is going to be a computer chip. It's going to be a vaccine. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. No, it's got to be something that has to do with worship of God and God's identity. It's got to be something that harkens back to the power of the papacy. There's no other things it can be because the Bible says so. And did the papacy have a vaccine back in the Dark Ages? Did it command worship in that way? No, it didn't. But it did happen to command worship when it came to keeping the Sabbath holy. And that is what's going to come out at the end of the time, what we believe in regards to the Sabbath and staying true to the Lord. And that is going to be the image that is going to be set up. And I think the question will come for us, And I think it's time now to stand and make the small decisions so we can stand with the big ones. Do you think if those young men had compromised on their lifestyle or their diet or their question of worship with their food, do you think that they would have had the guts to stand at the end of time for them? I don't believe so. Also, the point I like about this is there were 3 of them. I think that God gives us a little insight that there are going to be other people standing for the Lord. And then we can uphold and enforce and encourage each other with standing for the Lord at the end of time. God is calling us to walk with Him and walk with each other and encourage each other in this. So, a lot of times it's a beautiful Bible story about individuals who stood for the Lord. At the same time, it's a beautiful Bible story about how God calls us to stand for Him now and to spread His word and to be willing when it seems like the whole plain, everyone else is worshiping. Be willing to not compromise what we believe. To be willing to lovingly stand before the rulers of this world and say, live forever. We're willing to serve you. We have served you. But we're not willing to compromise in our worship for the Lord. Please bow your heads with me. Dear Lord, I thank you for the story we have of the 3 young men in the fiery furnace. I thank you for giving them strength to stand for you. I claim your promises to be with us as your people now and help us stand for you now. We ask that you give us your presence like you did with them as they tried to serve you in this way. And we thank you for all you do for us. Amen.